Welcome to the Redeemer Downtown podcast. In a moment, we'll hear from Pastor Pete answer the question, can we truly be happy? Which was shared on October 21st, 2025. Whether you're tuning in right here in the city or across the globe, get comfortable, open your heart, and prepare for a message that aims not just to explore happiness as we know it, but to invite us into something deeper. Let's listen in.
This is a reading from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1. It can be found on page 539 of your church Bible or the inside of your bulletin. I, the teacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. Moving on to chapter 2, verse 1. I said to myself, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet, when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. And then turn with me to chapter 11, verse 7. Light is sweet, and it pleases the eye to see the sun. However many years anyone may live, let them enjoy them all. But let them remember the days of darkness, for there will be many. Everything to come is meaningless. You who are young, be happy while you are young, and let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart, and whatever your eyes see. But know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. The word of the Lord.
Thanks, Grace Catherine, very much for reading that for me. Let me add my welcome to Jeff. It's great to have you here. And as we're thinking about this question of how can we be truly happy, I want to say up front that we can by no means in the time we've got cover all of the ins and outs of something like this. So it's never intended to be the kind of final word in the conversation, but rather part of a conversation. And that's why we have the question and answer after the talk, because it gives you the opportunity to interact with it. So that's your one valid reason for being on your mobile phones for the next 20 minutes is to upvote questions as they come up or to pose your questions by using the QR code. But let's think about this question. How can we be truly happy? Now, someone has said that everyone has to work out before they die what they're running from and to and why. And I think that's pretty obvious for us in America, particularly, and in the West in general, isn't it? We're running to and we're pursuing happiness. In fact, the answer seems so obvious as almost to be mundane. And this pursuit of happiness is ubiquitous for us in the West, and particularly, as I say, in America. It's a big part of how we understand the American dream. But, and I wonder if you identify with this, many of us are increasingly aware, and certainly there are lots of voices out there in the culture, that despite all of the effort we put into pursuing happiness, and despite all the enormous resources that we spend and invest in pursuing happiness, nonetheless, happiness increasingly is elusive to us. And so there's a paradox with that. And we're going to be thinking about why that is and how we can address that, and particularly what the Christian faith has to say as it speaks into this pursuit of happiness. So let's think about it under three headings. First of all, our pursuit of happiness. Secondly, what I call the paradox of happiness. And then thirdly, we're going to think about some measure of a resolution on this challenge as we think about receiving joy from God. So that's where we're going. Let's think first of all about our pursuit of happiness. Now, the American dream is often seen about being the pursuit of happiness because, of course, it comes up in the opening kind of words of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, amongst which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There it is, written down in the Constitution, as it were, or rather than Declaration. So as we think about that, it seems pretty obvious to us, but the one thing we should be aware is when they initially penned those words, the pursuit of happiness didn't kind of mean a hot pursuit, running after something. It was more a phrasing of allowing people to have the liberty to be able to experience happiness. Didn't necessarily elevate it to being this is what life is about. It was just saying it was part of the well-rounded life, and I think we would all agree about that. But one of the things that's happened is that we've taken that and we've made it the great pursuit of the West. The great pursuit of American society is to be happy, to hotly pursue happiness, to run after it. Now, if I need to persuade you about this, let me marshal some evidence for you. First and foremost, let's think about the rise of the cupcake. 2011, just across here in the village, Magnolia Bakery opened up and started doing cupcakes. And then up on the Upper West Side, there was sprinkles and various things. And then it became popularized as Sex and the City. Remember that program? Sex and the City, then had people eating cupcakes. And before you know where we are, cupcakes became global. And now, wherever you are, you can find a cupcake. Having a stressful day at work? Cupcake on the street corner. Finding the trains or the subway in New York too much to cope with, don't worry. As soon as you get up into Grand Central or Penn Station, there'll be 3 or 4 cupcake stalls. Feeling a bit worried about the fact that the cupcake has got too many calories in it? We've got a solution for that. The mini cupcake. Guilt-free cupcake enjoyment. Having a stressful day? Have a cupcake. Co-workers are problematic? Buy them all cupcakes. And with your injection of sugar and butter and a little few E-numbers and colorings, we'll all be happy again. In fact, I was walking downtown the other day, and I came across, and some of you will probably have visited this, a pet bakery. And inside, they had cupcakes, but they're not called cupcakes, are they? They're called, wait for it, pupcakes. Do you see what they did there? I'll explain to you afterwards if you're unsure. Now, the thing for me was that seemed a very unusual thing to do, because if there's one animal in the world that seems to have the market cornered on happiness, it's dogs. I can understand buying cupcakes for cats because they're cynical creatures. We have a cat, and she's the most dog-like cat we could find. But dogs don't need an injection of happiness, except if you're really pursuing happiness. Nothing makes us happier than a happy dog having a happy pupcake. Or let's try and be a little bit more maybe socially analytical. What about the way we greet one another? It used to be that the way we would greet one another was good day, because I'm wishing you a good day. It wasn't just the British who did that, by the way. You also used to do that as well once upon a time. Now, how do we greet one another? With a question. How are you? Because we've shifted from wishing someone a good day, and it's subtle but significant because these are the things that we do all day and actually change our perceptions of reality, to an inquiry about how you are. And we all know the socially acceptable response to that. Don't be overly vulnerable. I really wasn't asking for that. The answer is, I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine too. Good. We're both fine. I'm fine. You're fine. Let's move on with our lives. We're both maybe not happy, but we're doing fine. Because again, now starting to creep into Western society, into the US in particular, is such a sense of desiring to be happy that it's the number one thing we need to know about each other when we greet each other. Less about an intentionality of your good, more about a review of your personal state. Are you happy? We are pursuing happiness. I could quote the billions of dollars, $3 billion in the US alone that is spent on cupcakes, or the wider leisure industry, which is absolutely enormous. We are pursuing happiness, and we don't even necessarily think about it so much. Now, one philosopher who's written a lot about this is the French philosopher Pascal Bruckner. He's actually written a book called Perpetual Euphoria, on the duty to be happy, and the title is very significant, and he writes this. He says, our societies in the West put into the category of the pathological, the problematic, what other cultures consider normal, pain. And we put into the category of the normal and even the necessary, what other societies have considered exceptional, the feeling of happiness. The question is not whether we are more or less happy than our ancestors, but that our conception of happiness has changed. And to change utopias, he says, is to change constraints. Because we are probably living in the world's first societies that make people unhappy not to be happy. His point is this. Look, it's not just that we want happiness. Everybody wants happiness, to a degree. It's the point that we have so elevated happiness that we have made it the great goal for life. And we are unique for that. Travel the world and go to other societies. They do want to be happy, but they don't think it's the number one goal. Read some historical biographies and review people's lives, and you'll realize that in other times and other places, people did want to be happy, but it wasn't the number one goal, the summum bonum, the utopia we're all striving for. But it is today. And then he starts to hint at the second problem with that. When you elevate happiness to becoming your all and your everything, then it puts a pressure on you to be happy, such that we have this kind of deep paradox today, which is we are the first society to be unhappy that we are not happy. The duty to be happy is putting a weight on our shoulders that we can't bear. Which brings me, secondly, to the paradox of happiness. The paradox of happiness. And this is where our reading from Ecclesiastes, I think, is really significant, because the paradox of happiness has long been observed, and probably no better observed than by the writer of Ecclesiastes. Commonly amongst the commentators, he's taken to be Solomon, and you can see there in the very start of the first paragraph that we have in our bulletins, as he calls himself the teacher, because he's got something to teach us this morning. He says, I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. And then he says, what a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. And he embarked on a kind of study, a case study, and he was the one person who had all the resources to really do that study, because it was a study about happiness. Chapter 2, verse 1, second paragraph. He said, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. In other words, he used all of his resources, all of his power as king, to conduct a study, to find out if happiness was achievable by pushing into and pursuing the things of this world. He denied himself nothing. He wanted the finest wines, he had them. He had a harem so he could have as much sex as he wanted. He tried to achieve great things, built huge, great big architectural projects, and formed whole fields that were irrigated as he saw, society around him flourish. He amassed more wealth and gold. Of course, Solomon's wealth is that of legend. He had all the power that he could want, and he was one of the wisest persons to ever live. In other words, if there's any marker of where one would say you can find happiness in this world, whether it's pleasure or achievements, or accomplishing great things or amassing enormous wealth, he had it all. And the sobering conclusion that he comes to is there in chapter 2, verse 11, at the bottom of the fourth paragraph. He says, when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Now, we need to be nuanced about what he means by meaningless, because our word for meaningless is not quite the word he means by meaningless. Meaningless for us can mean utterly pointless. He's not actually saying that. It's more subtle. For him, the word is sometimes translated in the older versions as vanity, and it means something that is fleeting, something that is there but in a momentary sense and then is gone. I don't know if you've ever had an early morning walk out on a meadow or in Central Park, and there's been a heavy dew. And in the morning, in that kind of first light, the mist settles over the ground and in the hollows of the ground, over the moisture of the ground. And it's very beautiful, but then as soon as the sun rises and catches it, it burns it away and it's all gone. The morning mist is fleeting, is meaningless in this sense. That's what he's saying. He's not saying that no happiness can be gained by all these things he's mentioned. He's saying that it's fleeting. Ultimately, it's unsatisfying. It's not permanent enough and stable enough to make it the main good in your life. That's what he's saying. And he should know because he tried everything. And just isn't that the case? I wonder if you've tried it. We heard from Clara that she came to New York City, seeking in many ways to achieve her childhood dream, and she got to do it. But it was fascinating, wasn't it, that she didn't locate her happiness there. Of course, if you asked her, she wasn't saying it was a bad thing to dance on the stage. You could see the joy in her face as she described ballet. It clearly gave her great happiness. But it wasn't her all and everything, ultimately. And I wonder if you've noticed that. Pursuing things like, joy and food and drink, or pleasure in relationships, or achieving things, they're not bad things. God is not against the good things he's created. But he wants to warn us that that is not where our ultimate happiness can be found. Why? Because they don't last long enough. They're not secure enough. Martina Navratilova, who knew a thing or two about achieving great things, once said this: "The moment of winning is far too short to live for that and nothing else." In other words, if you think, I'm going to achieve happiness by achieving great things, if you are lucky enough to get to the mountaintop, you'll realize that at the mountaintop, there's one of two things. Either there's just a long look down, as you realize it never really satisfies you, or you'll see another mountaintop and you strive after that because now you've got to do something more. In other words, it's ultimately unsatisfying. And these gentle but important warnings have been echoing down throughout history in lots of ways. Christianity is not unique for noticing this. Think of some of the great myths. Think of King Midas, the man who wanted to pursue happiness in wealth. And so he ultimately formed a bargain with the goddess Dionysus that if he was granted the ability to turn everything to gold, then he would be truly happy. And so he woke up one morning, and with a surge of excitement, he thought he would test out his new gift. And he reached across to his bedside table and touched it, and it turned to gold. And the elation gripped and surged through his body like electricity. And so he went around the house in the kind of euphoria of this great gift, touching everything and turning it to gold. Candlesticks and flowers all turned to gold. And then for a moment he realized something, and he paused, and he thought that he would be happy if he could just smell the fragrance of a rose. As he reached out and picked a rose off a bush, but no sooner had he touched it than it turned to gold. And the fragrance was gone. And he felt just a momentary sadness for the first time that morning. Wearied by running around the palace, he decided that he was going to take a bit of a rest. And so he sat down at a table and decided to refresh himself with some grapes. He reached out to touch the grapes, and of course they turned to gold. And then sadness was replaced by another emotion, fear. He suddenly wondered whether the bargain that he had made with Dionysus actually had a darker side to it. He started to weep, and just at that moment, you'll know the story, his daughter walked into the palace. Seeing her father weeping, she immediately went to comfort him, and seeing his daughter and feeling his sense of need, he immediately went to hug her, and he put his arms around her and hugged her, and she was turned to a gold statue. Tragedy. From sadness to fear to tragedy. Such is the warning of the myth for all who will pursue happiness in things of this world that, though good, were never meant to sustain the weight of our expectations. This is the paradox of happiness, that the more we pursue it, the more we find it elusive. The more we find that as we seek to find happiness in things, we overload them with a burden they were never intended to bear, and we find that happiness is not found in those things. And there's another problem with happiness as well. If we pursue it in things, not only do they not satisfy, but also if we say to ourselves that if I just get enough things or just achieve enough great goals in my life or just have the right circumstances, then I'll be happy, then we're always going to be at the whim of our circumstances. And of course, it's a fool's errand because we can't control our circumstances. Many of us have gone through this journey. In our late teens, early 20s, we have a conception for us of what we think will make us happy. And it's usually circumstantial. doing certain things, achieving a matrix of things, maybe being popular but not superficial, maybe having a career but it not being too heavy for me, maybe having enough money but not being controlled by my money. We think, when I get those things, and of course I take my health for granted, and we press into our 20s, and then we find that life, particularly in this city, is not so straightforward. Friends leave us. Jobs get lost. Health deserts us with a sudden diagnosis that we never saw coming and we never thought possible. I could go on. Our bank balances run low. And we suddenly realize that we can't control our circumstances, and then the angst sets in. And so much of our 30s is about dealing with the failure of our dreams to provide us with happiness in our 20s. And then 40s and how big our midlife crisis is, it often shows whether we really worked out those lessons in our 30s or not. That is often what happens, because happiness can't be controlled by circumstances, because it was never meant to be found in circumstances. This is the great paradox of happiness. Listen to these words from Viktor Frankl in his seminal book, Man's Search for Meaning. He says this: don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue. And it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself. Happiness must happen, and the same holds for success. You have to let it happen by not caring about it too much. I want you to listen to what your conscience commands you to do and go on to carry it out to the best of your knowledge. Then you will live to see that in the long run, I say, success and happiness will follow you precisely because you'd forgotten to think about them. What's he saying? He's saying that the way to pursue happiness, to receive happiness, is actually not to pursue it, but to pursue other worthier goals. And I think if you pause and reflect for a moment, you know this. Anyone who's dedicated them to a craft, a sport, or a discipline like learning a musical instrument or something will know that. Often in doing that, you actually have to sacrifice quite a lot of happiness. You know, you don't get to eat the way you want. If you want to run a marathon, you often have to say no to opportunities to go out and hang out with your friends and maybe drink at happy hour or something like that. You have to be quite disciplined. And so you're forgoing happiness. Why? Because you have a bigger goal that you're seeking to achieve. The goal of completing the marathon, or the goal of learning a musical instrument. Or think about parents. Very few parents say, I tell you what, let's have children because it's going to make us happy to be sleep deprived for the next 2 years of our lives. It doesn't really happen. Parents have it as a natural extension because they seek the good of the children, and seeking the good of the children at their best, they find that happiness has been there alongside them, and they know not when it joined them. You find happiness by not pursuing happiness. Pursue happiness, it will be elusive. Pursue worthy goals, bigger goals, greater goals, and you will find that happiness has been alongside you, and you didn't even notice it for a while. This was one of the great insights of one of the great thinkers of the Western world, Augustine of Hippo, that actually we find happiness by pursuing the greatest good in our lives, which itself is not happiness. And he went on to say that the greatest happiness we receive is in a relationship with God. That's actually what the Bible uses the word joy to explain. Joy is not circumstantial and superficial happiness. Joy is about a deep-seated sense of contentment and satisfaction that comes about in a relationship with God, which brings me to my last point, receiving joy from God. Look down right at the end of our reading in the final paragraph, in the penultimate paragraph, 11 verse 7. The writer of Ecclesiastes says this: light is sweet, and it pleases the eyes to see the sun. However many years anyone may live, but let them enjoy them all. And then look down the last paragraph. You who are young, be happy while you're young. Let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart and whatever your eyes see, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. What he's saying is this: if you want to be joyful, you need to live a life that has a sense of a relationship with God. You need to live life with respect to God. Why? Because He is the greatest good in life. And if happiness comes from pursuing the greatest good, there is no greater good than God. Augustine captured this in his Confessions. He wrote, "How sweet all at once it was for me to be rid of the fruitless joys which I had once feared to lose. You, God, drove them from me. You who are the true, the sovereign joy. You drove them from me and took their place. You who are sweeter than all pleasure." Let me put it this way. God is not against happiness. God is not a promoter of dry duty. God is not a killjoy. When Jesus wants to give the greatest sign of what he's come to do and to be about, in John chapter 2, the very first sign which he says will help you to understand what his whole life, death, and ministry is all about, you know what he does? He throws an enormous party, turns water into wine. And if that seems dissonant to you, it's because you don't know what he's about. He's the God of joy. But he wants you to find joy in the right place, which is not in the good things he's created, but supremely in a relationship with him. You know, in the New Testament, he comes across someone who's a joy seeker, but for whom life has gone badly awry. You can read it in John chapter 4. It's known as the woman at the well. And he meets her at a well, and it's a very significant well. It's the well of the patriarch Jacob. And that's important because the well is there providing water in a dry and arid land. And straight from the off, his interaction with her is a whole metaphor for happiness. You see, just like she has to go to that well every day to draw water out from the well, and it's never enough, and she has to go back every day, and so the drudgery and the kind of exhausting, carrying that heavy bucket of water backwards and forwards from the well is a metaphor for her life and all of the ways that she's been pursuing happiness and pleasure in the wrong things. As Jesus initiates a conversation with her, it becomes apparent that he knows that she's been pursuing happiness in men and in a series of unfulfilling encounters with men, and she's been sexually unfaithful, and she's on husband number 5 or 6. She's kind of lost count. And as a result of that, she's been ostracized from her community, and so she has to go to the well in the heat of the midday sun. All the other women go early in the morning when it's cool, but not for her. The shame is too great, she's been cut off, and so her pursuit of happiness has led her to a lifetime of regrets and isolation from her community, and maybe even isolation from herself. And then one day, that day, at the well, she meets a man who's like no other. This man is the first man probably she's ever met who's not trying to get something from her or use her for himself. And she can't quite work it out. And in the midst of the conversation, Jesus, as he so often does, goes right to the nub of the issue and points to her that her constant bringing this bucket to the well to draw water and then trudging back home is actually illustrative of the way that she's pursuing happiness but hasn't been able to find it. And then he offers her something which is simply stunning. He says to her poignantly, "Everyone who drinks this water from this well will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will be in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." It's difficult to pick up the tone in her response. Perhaps it's sarcastic, certainly a bit defensive. She says to him, maybe saying truer than she knows, "Sir, give me this water, then I won't have to keep schlepping to this well to draw water." I put the word schlepping in there, by the way. He explains to her then that to be refreshed, truly refreshed at a deeper soul level, she needs to understand two things. First of all, she needs to understand that she's been seeking happiness and satisfaction in all the wrong places. That a relationship with another person, sex with a man, whilst a good thing, could never have satisfied her. It could never fill up her soul and refresh her soul. And secondly, instead, Jesus is saying to her that she needs to come to him. He tells her that he is the Messiah, the great anointed one. That is, he is God himself in human form. And only in a relationship with him can she truly be refreshed. In other words, she needs to give up her dry cisterns that are ultimately unsatisfying in the desert, and she needs to come to him. And he describes himself as the source of living water. And she says in a relationship with him, she'll be endlessly refreshed. And it's fascinating. At the end of the interaction, as she's still figuring out all that she's just heard, she runs back to her community, the very community that has ostracized her. And she shouts to them from the rooftops, "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did." They know what she did. That's why they don't want to be around her. But her shame and guilt are gone now, because she met a man who didn't condemn her but loved her, who didn't use her, but instead would give himself up for her. I don't know what you're searching happiness in this morning. I don't know how fruitless your journey and your search has been, but I do want you to know this. If you come to Jesus, you will come to the one who is uniquely able to satisfy that deep ache you've got, that deep longing for joy, satisfaction. And you might say, well, how can I know? How can I know that he'll be different? How can I know that he'll satisfy? How can I know he's not just trying to get something from me and this isn't a bait and switch? Well, that's a great question. You can know this because he who wants to make you full poured himself out for you on the cross. He gave himself up for you completely. In other words, he drained himself of all of his life so that you might be filled with all of his life and know joy. He is the one who on the cross thirsted for you so that you might never be thirsty at a soul level again. You might be satisfied in the deepest recesses of your heart. He suffered for you so that you might experience joy. And when you get that, when that starts to go down as deep as Jacob's well, then it stirs up in you a deep refreshment. And you can enjoy the things of this world, but knowing that they are ultimately not the great source of joy because you know him who is, and who is the great giver of all good gifts. As the word of the song we're about to hear put it, the joy of the Lord is my strength and my song, that sweet melody in my soul all day long. No matter what comes, I just keep going on because the joy of the Lord is my strength and my song. I'm going to pause there. Lots for us to think about. I hope you got some great questions.
At Redeemer Downtown, we believe that the gospel has the power to renew both our lives and our city. If today's sermon touched your heart or sparked new thoughts, we encourage you to take it further, share and talk about it with a friend, pray over what you heard, or continue to meditate on today's passage. We'd also love to stay connected with you. Discover more sermons and resources at redeemerdt.com. Thanks for listening. Until then, go in peace, live in grace, and let God's truth and love shape every part of your life.